Now, I now want to address one of the basic question of law and economics, namely the question, or the nucleus of a theory, better, which gives us an insight about how the law affects the economy. How the law affects the economy. Yeah. Yes?
Sir, is the Constitution a legal rule or is it a standard?
Well, you know, the concept of legal rule or legal standard is a concept which pertains to one particular legal norm, not to a whole set of norms. And in a constitution, for instance, you have legal norms which are precise, which are rules. For instance, the legal norm according to which the President of the Republic must be 40. That is a clear rule. But then you have, for instance, very vague norms also. For instance, the Bill of Rights. So you have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and it is not clear what exactly this means, you know. And it is then, if you have a Bill of Rights, then what you do is you say, well, you know, we want to protect religious freedom. But what that exactly means, we cannot say. We cannot write a long laundry list of what this all means. So we delegate this to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court should decide, and we trust the Supreme Court that they take the right decisions. You see? So that is in general. So whenever you find in a constitution or in any legal text a norm which is very precise, then this means that the government or the parliament does not want to delegate. They want to exactly tell the administration what to do. And if you find, however, a vague norm, then this means they want to delegate this to the wise people, the wise women and men in the courts. You see? Now, I come now to a research result which is 50 years old, or even more than 50 years, by Ronald Coase on the so-called Coase Theorem. And this is, even though it is old, and I would not include it here if you had some basic knowledge of law and economics, but it is one of the really interesting and it is an example of a very creative mind and a very creative result. Now, Ronald Coase is an economist from Chicago. He died recently at the age of 101, and he got the Nobel Prize for the Nobel Prize in economics for what I just tell you. And Ronald Coase looked at legal norms from an economic point of view. That is, he wanted to find out under what condition a legal norm increases efficiency. Whether a legal norm increases or decreases efficiency, right? Now, as you are not all economists, you might not know what that means, increasing efficiency. Now, basically, it is, I give you that in a nutshell, an economy, and the concept of efficiency is always related to the economy as a whole. So the term efficiency has nothing to do with the use of this word in everyday language. So forget about everyday language. So if we say, for instance, about, this guy is efficient, that has nothing to do with economic efficiency. Efficiency is always related to the whole society, to all people in the society. And efficiency, when we say something increases efficiency, then it can mean two things. The first is what we call a Pareto Improvement. Now, Pareto Improvement means that assume you have a society of 1.2 billion people in India, and you have some changes, some legal or economic changes. And you ask, how does that influence the well-being of the people? And then we say it is a Pareto improvement if this change increases either all or improves the welfare of all people or of some people, or at least one person. So at least one person must be better off by this change, and nobody would say, I'm worse off. That is a Pareto improvement. And we would easily see that, if we would put this criterion to a test of a social contract, and we would ask 1.2 billion Indian people, would you agree with that if that is possible, that it should be done, then probably everybody would agree, or at least not contradict, right? Now, the second is the so-called Kaldor-Hicks improvement. Kaldor-Hicks means that, again, we have a change for the whole society, and now the change, however, produces winners and losers. So some lose, some gain. And the winners, however, the gains for the winners are so high that in principle the winners could compensate all the losers fully so that they are even and still have a net gain. This is what we call a Kaldor-Hicks efficiency or potential Pareto improvement. Now it is very important for you to understand that this compensation of the losers under the Kaldor-Hicks principle is only a hypothetical necessity. It is not required to actually compensate the losers under this principle. So the losers may remain with their losses and the winners remain with all their gains, but still the criterion is fulfilled if it would be in principle possible, hypothetically, to compensate all the losers and the winners still have a gain. Now, of course, you would say, so why is Kaldor-Hicks defendable in any way? So now assume that the world would change, and you lose, let's say, $1,000, and I gain $10,000 by this change, and everybody else is not affected. Then this would fulfill the Kaldor-Hicks criterion, right? But why should you, why should you approve that? Why should you say, so why should I lose $1,000 only because another guy gets $10,000? That is not, somehow not plausible. But Kaldor and Hicks were both great economists, both of them, and they were not simplistic, or they were not, let's say, aware of this problem which I just mentioned. And still, I have once read this Hicks article, which is from 1938, so it's 80 years old already. And in this article, he writes that he proposes this criterion, and he believes that in a social contract, everybody would agree to this. So how do they come to this conclusion? So if you lose $1,000 and I get $10,000, why should you approve that? There's no reason to that. If you keep your interest, you would not approve that in a social contract. Now, the argument is this, which Calder, the argument in a nutshell, is the so-called general compensation argument. Now, assume we have here an economy in which we have three homogeneous groups, let's say upper class, middle class, lower class. Or if you want it more abstract, you have only three individuals, A, B, and C. Three individuals or three homogeneous groups which have this, whose members have the same interests, right? Now, you have a project, some project. And from this project, A, group A, makes a gain, let's say a monetary gain of 1, B of 1, and C loses 1. Then the Calder-Hicks criterion is fulfilled, right? Now you have project 2, A gains 1, B loses 1, and C gains 1. Again, Calder-Hicks criterion is fulfilled. Then you have project 3, and now you see what comes. A loses 1, and the other two gain 1. But if you take these three projects as a package, then the Pareto improvement is fulfilled. The Pareto principle is fulfilled. So that was the idea of these people who proposed this, that they say, well, you know, we cannot, we cannot make everybody better off by each single project. We have to look at a larger package of projects. And if you take the whole package, then sometimes you lose, then I lose, you lose, you lose. But at the end of the day, or at the end of our lives, we have all gained by this, by accepting this criterion. So that was the hope of Calder and Hicks. And of course, we know that this is not always true. You might have projects which always benefit one group. They are efficient in this sense, but always benefit one group. And I give you only one simple example. Now assume that you have a large city, and for simplicity's sake, assume that this city has only two roads, two streets, two long streets. One street is High Street, the other street is Low Street. Now assume that the city government wants to build a public park. Should the public park be built in the High Street or in the Low Street? It should be, if we use the efficiency criterion, it should be built in High Street, because the willingness to pay for the public park is higher for the rich people who all live in High Street, right? So the public park goes into High Street. Now assume a college is to be built. Where is the college be built? In High Street. Because the rich people are most interested in the college, and therefore the college, according to Calder-Hicks criterion, is built in High Street. Then a university is of course also built in High Street. Then a concert hall is built in High Street. Now a prison is built, and the people are somewhat scary, you know, about the inmates, you know, they might, where is the willingness to pay, to accept this highest? In Low Street, you know. People in the High Street, they would spend much more money not to have the prison in their vicinity, So the prison is to be built in Low Street because it is more efficient in Low Street. Now assume that a garbage dump is built. Where is it built? In Low Street. Now let's say a home for insane people is built. Where? In Low Street. And so on. So you can easily see that this idea of general compensation, it has something in it, but it is not necessary. So you must not, you cannot, it's simply silly to say, but if an economist tells you that efficiency is always a good thing. Efficiency is always then a good thing if the long-run consequences of efficiency, of the efficiency criterion, result in Pareto improvements, where everybody is doing better, but you by this example which I gave you with High Street and Low Street, you see that each of these projects is efficient, but at the end of the day, the people in Low Street are much worse off, and the people in High Street are much better off. And now, you know, we have this problem with the refugees in Germany, in Hamburg. In Hamburg last year, we had 67,000 refugees from Syria, these countries. So 67,000 were allocated to Hamburg, and the city government now builds home for these refugees around the city. You know, they are spread around the city, and some of these homes are built in Low Street, and some of these homes are built in High Street. You know, in the best, best quarters. But now the people in High Street, they are doing everything. They go to court and so on and say that this is that they fight against it. So they want that they all are built in Low Street, and this is of course not acceptable. There is no legal, criterion by which we can say that this should be like this. See what I mean? So what I want to say is this. Efficiency is a very important criterion, but it is not, we must be careful, especially when it comes to constitutional values, things like that. But having said this, the rest of what I say is about efficiency. And Coase, I come back to Coase, he wanted to say something about how legal norms, or whether legal norms at all, and under what conditions legal norms might have an influence on efficiency, right? And now the interesting thing, which is really interesting from a methodological point of view, is the following, which shows you how great scholars like Coase work. Coase, the question Coase asked himself was not what everybody would probably have asked, so I imagine how a legal norm affects efficiency. But he asked himself a totally different question. He asked himself, what are the conditions for a legal norm not to have any effect on efficiency? You see? And then if I can specify under what condition a legal norm does not have any impact on efficiency, then I can, from that, I can I can follow up if these conditions are not met, whether and what impact a legal norm has on economic efficiency. So Coase, he twisted the whole question, the main question, totally twisted it. He did not ask what is the impact of a legal norm on efficiency, what everybody would ask, but he asked himself, under what condition a legal norm has no impact at all on efficiency. See what I mean? Now, I must now, I give you now an example of how Coase illustrates this and how he arrived at the famous so-called Coase Theorem, which describes the conditions under which a legal norm does not impact the efficiency, but the efficiency is reached. And I first give you the Coase theorem itself, and then explain it how Coase himself explained it. Now, first, before stating the Coase theorem, I must make one differentiation which is very important here. We have in the law, we have two types of norms, of legal norms. We have so-called mandatory rules and we have default rules. And a mandatory rule is a rule which is mandatory in the sense that it is a strict legal command. You must do this or that, or you must not do this or that. That is a mandatory rule. For instance, a typical mandatory rule, a legal command by the government, for instance, is the red traffic light. So if you drive a car, there's a red traffic light, the government tells you, you must not drive, otherwise you are punished. And of course, you might be lucky that there is no policeman. But in principle, you are punished if you drive. These rules, that is not what Coase had in mind. He had in mind so-called mandatory rules, so-called default rules. They apply, in principle they apply, but parties can change them. So for instance, a typical default rule is, for instance, now assume you in a business-to-business contract, not consumer contract, in a business-to-business contract, you have, as if you buy something, let's say you buy bananas, for instance, a large stock of bananas, and you say, well, and the seller tells you, you know, I have bananas which are not good quality, but you can still use them for some other purposes, you know, and you say, okay, sell them to me, and I don't make use of my rights as a buyer, so if the quality is low. So we agree that whatever you deliver me at a very low price, of course, the contract is still valid, and I have no right to get a deduction, for instance. That is what we call a default rule. Understood this? Good. Now, the Coase theorem says the following. If legal norms, default rules, are precisely defined, there must be legal norms which are precisely defined, and if the transactions cost, that is the cost of making contracts and enforcement contracts, these are what we call transaction costs, if these transaction costs are zero, then legal norms have no impact on the use of resources and on the efficiency of the use of these resources. That is the famous Coase theorem. The Coase theorem, therefore, tries to specify the conditions, not how the law impact the economy, the efficiency of the economy, but tries to describe the conditions under which the law has no impact at all on efficiency. Now, I come back to here we have this central term of transactions cost, and the transaction costs are the cost of making a contract and enforcing the contract, the information cost, the cost of coordination of parties and so on, but also the cost of enforcement. And if these costs are zero, which of course they never are, then there is no impact on the resources. So now I want to show this to you by way of an example, how Coase argued. And this is an example which I take from Coase's original article, and it is related to a problem which was, it's not anymore, but in the 19th century it was a real big problem in the United States when the Middle West was, when the Midwest was, when people went to the West and they set up farms and ranches and so on, then they had farms and they had ranches, and one big legal problem in the United States, especially in countries like Tennessee and so on, you know, these agricultural areas, there was always a conflict between ranchers and farmers. Because now assume, you know, this is a territory here, and this is a ranch, and this is a farm. And here is a wheat grower, and this is a cattle raiser. Now the problem is that the ranch, this cattle from the ranch trespasses to the farm and causes damages there. That is the problem. And in the question is now, what should we do with what is here the problem? Can we simply say the farmer should should get damage compensation from the rancher, and so that, you know, the lawyers, they discuss these problems in a purely doctrinal way. And some lawyers said, well, the farmers must fence in their farm, and some other lawyers said, no, the ranchers must fence in their ranch, and then they had all kinds of silly arguments, and the problem could not be solved, or was somehow solved, but it was not really understood. Now, Coase says the following. He says, well, what is the problem here? What is the economic problem here? And he says, well, there are these cattle here, and they inflict a damage on the farm. How can this economically, what can we do not to have this damage? And he said, now assume we have, every year we have damages of 100. But the yearly cost of a fence to keep off the cattle is 200. Then Coase says, and any economist would also say this, there's no problem at all. We should not avoid these damages. These damages, that is the efficient solution, to have these damages. Because if we want to prevent these damages, we have to incur cost of 200 per year, and it makes no economic sense at all from an efficiency point of view to incur cost of 200 per year to avoid a damage of 100 per year. Would you agree? So from an economic point of view, it is clear that if the damages are lower than the damage prevention cost, then it is better to let the damages happen. Right? Now assume that the yearly damages are 200 and the damage and the fence, the cost of the fence is 100. Then the situation is clearly different, because now we can say that the damages, that it is efficient to build the fence, because now we incur a yearly cost of 100 to avoid a damage, to prevent a damage from 200 to happen. So we gain 100, the society gains 100 by erecting this fence, right? So the first thing from an economic point of view, therefore, to understand the whole problem is to look what is the efficient solution, which no lawyer had done so far. So Coase says you have to first to see what is here the problem, what is the economic problem, and what is the solution to this problem. And then the solution to the problem is to maximize the total value of this land, of the two, of the ranch and the farm, and that is maximized if a fence is built and if the cost of the fence are lower than the damages. And if it is the other way around, there should be no fence. And it is efficient to build the fence if the cost of the fence are lower. And then the next question we have to ask, when we know what the efficient, what questions we have to ask to get to the efficient solution, we now have then to ask, do the legal norms lead to the efficient solution? Now, I don't know how much you are aware of property law and the law of torts, but basically the legal order can react to this situation by using alternatively three legal norms. You could, for instance, say the farmer has an injunction. Can any one of you tell me what that means? So the legal system endows the farmer with an injunction. What does it mean? You are the law. Where are the lawyers?
Injunction is a specific sort of order to do or not do something.
Yeah, no, an injunction.
Is not allowed to come to the farm.
Yes, if the farmer is endowed, if the legal system, if the law gives the farmer the right to an injunction, that means that the farmer can prevent the damage from happening. He can write a letter or inform the rancher and say, well, your cattle is causes here a damage and I don't want this, and I ask you to prevent the cattle from doing this. And if he does not do it, then he can close down the ranch. Then the ranch is closed down. That is what an injunction is. See what I mean? So an injunction, if you are endowed with an injunction, this gives you a very strong position. Right? So the farmer can then say, I prohibit you, I give you 2 weeks' time, but if you don't do it in 2 weeks, I go to court, I get a preliminary ruling, and that closes down your ranch, and then you have no ranch anymore. Okay? So the second is no injunction. You don't have the right to do that, but if you have damages, you are entitled to damage compensation. That is the second possibility. And the third possibility is you have no rights at all as farmers. You have to tolerate this. You have to tolerate certain amount of damages the legal order does not give you any right. These are the three possibilities which a civil law system or also a common law system could give to the affected. Now, the question Coase asks here is not whether any of these rules is just, in any way, but whether this rule leads to an efficient result, namely that the fence is built when it is efficient and that the fence is not built when it is efficient. So now assume first that the yearly damages are 100 and the yearly cost of the fence is 200. In that case, it is not efficient to build the fence. So the result should be, the efficient result would be no fence, right? Now, let us start here with this. No rights. If the farmer gets no rights at all, do we get at the efficient solution?
Yes. Farmer should build the
No. Let me repeat this. We assume that the yearly cost, that the yearly damages are 100, but that the yearly cost of the fence are 200. So it would not be efficient to build a fence. And now we ask whether the legal rule which we have leads to efficiency or not to efficiency. So now assume the legal rule is the farmer has no right at all. What is the effect of that rule?
There will be no fence.
Pardon?
There will be no fence.
There will be no fence. Why not?
Because it is more efficient to incur the damages than to make the fence.
Yes, the farmer has to bear the losses and he makes then the calculation. He says, okay, I have the choice, either I make the fence or that which cost me 200, or I make no fence, which cost me only 100. And if he wants to maximize his profits or reduce his losses, then he will not make a fence, and therefore we get with this rule, we get the efficient solution, right? Now assume that the farmer is entitled to damage compensation, but has no right to injunction. What is then the result? Why?